Thank you so much, Andrew, for being with us. Let's start with stimulus. We now just learned today that, in fact, we're not going to get a vote in the House that will put forward the 2,000. The Republicans have stopped that. Where does the stimulus stand at the moment, and how important is it for the economy?
Yeah, I think the stimulus is still on the one yard line, and that we're pretty close to still getting a deal. There's certainly going to be a few more back and forth between the different parties, but if you look at where they've come from over the last really 6 months, they're almost there. They haven't been that far apart, really, I think, in the negotiations for a while, and it was all coming close together. Certainly the president now has some concerns about the size of those stimulus checks, and they're going to have to work that out. But I'm still pretty optimistic that a stimulus bill is going to get completed, going to get enacted into law in the near term. It's always difficult to predict exactly when, but it's coming, and that will be really good for the U.S. economy, especially small businesses who really need the Paycheck Protection Program to revive up again and start helping those small businesses who've really been hit the hardest by the pandemic.
So as I understand it, you were there, I believe, for the CARES Act, so you know how this works in Washington. As a practical matter, were we looking at December 28th, perhaps? Because they tried to do unanimous consent. That didn't work because there were some Republicans. Now they're talking about a roll call vote on December 28th. Yeah,
that's all being worked out right now. My experience on these big bills, and this is definitely a big one, that you usually run into some unexpected turbulence along the way as you're kind of going into kind of land the bill, so to speak, and it can take a little bit. But in the grand scheme of things, I still think they're pretty close. Certainly, we have the funding deadline on Monday, and right now, my expectation is that they're putting in the Senate, trying to figure out where they want to go and whether or not they want to cut a deal on the stimulus checks, if they'll stay stay firm on $600 or want to make other changes. But those negotiations are all going on right now. I think the main thing for your viewers to know is that I still think a deal is likely in the near term. This is just part of the process. And, somebody's worked on a lot of bills over the years. This doesn't totally surprise me that we're at the end of the year and there's a lot of haggling going on over this bill. That's a pretty common outcome in Washington. Certainly going over the Christmas holiday we haven't done that in a while, but still the overall process is still the same, that last minute negotiations to finalize a really important bill. So that's pretty standard in Washington. So I remain optimistic.
So Andrew, how about keeping funding going for the government? Because we have the NDAA, that National Defense Authorization Act, that the president now has vetoed. And as I understand it, that could well shut down the government because they're going to run out of funding.
Yeah, and that will depend on if there's a veto override on Monday. Vetoes are, in the post-war period, a pretty common part of our process, and they just haven't been, I think we've had so many deals that have been worked out recently, we've kind of forgot the role of veto sometimes. But Congress, now has a chance to override the veto. It looks like they may have the votes to do that, so we should know on Monday. My expectation is either they'll see if they have the votes for overriding the veto, but if they don't, they'll pass a quick short-term extension for federal funding to avoid a shutdown.
What about the president's claim that there's a lot of pork in this? I mean, the president is objecting to the not repealing the Section 230 of the Communications Act, but he also is saying there's a lot of money in there that shouldn't be. Is that pretty much typical, though, when we're funding the government? Usually there's a lot of things in there that maybe you wouldn't want.
Well, yeah, certainly in these bills, there are a lot of priorities that get put in there, and sometimes presidents don't agree with some of the priorities of Congress. Again, that's all part of the back and forth process. Certainly the 230 liability shield issue was kind of the foremost issue that he has signaled for a long time now that he wanted to see included in that legislation, and that a veto could come if it wasn't included. So I wasn't surprised that he vetoed it at all. Because of that fact, it's a long-standing policy priority for him.
Is he concerned about what this is going to do to GDP growth? That was a priority for this president when he came in, and he had some real progress on that for a while. Obviously, the pandemic threw a curveball. Is he concerned about that?
Well, listen, I think the stimulus is critical for getting the economy back up to where it was a year ago. As you correctly pointed out, the economy had gotten to a really great place with record low unemployment rates across all demographics, finally getting the GDP growth above 3%. I think the economy can go back to that. once we get through this pandemic. And that's why I see this additional round of the stimulus is pretty important for helping us kind of bridge that gap. Now that we've got a vaccine coming out, it does look like the public health side of this crisis is getting to a better place. We just need a little bit more time on the economic side. The economic side has to buy a little bit more time for the public health side before the economy can kind of get back to normal. So, I think we all want to cross our fingers that this vaccine works.